Okay, Katie, Parla, thank you so much for inviting me here to your living room today in Rome as we connect over what lights us up about Italy and its amazing food. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me and thanks for coming over.
As I come to you straight from a visit with my distant relatives in my grandfather's hometown in the Caserta region, where I literally immersed myself in my family's food culture, I want to let everyone know how you inspired this trip. I, knew that I was gonna sort of go through a big life change. And back in June, we're recording this now in September, but back in June, my aunt and uncle were visiting, and my uncle is sort of one of those people who I always go to for career advice. And they were visiting, and I said, I really feel like I might lose my job, my corporate job, and what am I gonna do? And I was sort of feeling like I had already had a trip to Iceland booked around the time that I might have lost my job, and I said, you know what, maybe I can travel and extend sort of my cookbook journey and learn to cook with some distant relatives where my grandfather's from, because I knew that a cousin had moved back to his birthplace, his birth hometown. And my uncle said, you need to watch Katie Parla's Rome. They pulled it up and I watched it, and I watched you walk around Rome and sort of interview people. And I thought, oh my gosh, I could totally do this. How interesting to just sort of dig into the backstory of someone's sort of joy in either having a shop or a restaurant, or why they're, making a certain cuisine. And what an incredible experience as an extension of the cookbook to go to the town of my origination of my last name and immerse myself in that food culture, just like you're immersing yourself in food culture in general in Italy, and not only Rome. So I decided to book the trip, and now I'm sitting here in Rome on my way, from that trip out. But what was it that attracted you to the Italian food culture, and how did you grow into such a respected culinary guide?
Well, I think initially, like so many Italian American people in the US, I grew up with an identity that felt Italian. But after my first trip here in 1996, I realized I didn't know anything about Italy. And I needed to know everything about Italy. And it was actually like during this trip as a sophomore in high school, we did this bus tour. We had frozen gnocchi, microwaved every day. It was kind of heinous. And I was like, this is not what I thought I was getting. Let me figure out this culture, get beyond the kind of mass tourism type of experience. For me, as a sophomore in high school, the most logical way to do that was to focus all my attention on moving to Italy when I grew up, which would allow that. But I was also studying art history in college, so I didn't know that you could do a career in food until after I got here. And I was doing private tours because I had a background in art history and archaeology. I was providing people with these curated experiences, but really spending a lot of my time on the tour talking about food culture. So when I saw an ad for a degree in Italian gastronomic culture, I signed up and then shifted my tour offerings away from archaeology towards food and beverage. And I mean, I think I didn't necessarily, I don't feel like I'm a great writer. I don't even enjoy writing all that much, which is not a unique complaint on behalf of people in our profession. But I really like curating people's food experiences, but I feel like Italian food culture, or really Italian food cultures, all the regional nuances, deserve someone with actual expertise to be talking about them, not someone with a casual or passing interest, not someone who's following a trend. And so I think I built my reputation and earned the trust of my readers and viewers by doing research-based coverage, but also providing them with a true connection to the people that I was writing about. And I feel really strongly that as someone who perpetually suffers imposter syndrome, I don't have a strong enough story of my own. But that's cool. That actually works perfectly with what lights me up, what my passion is. And that is telling the stories of other people through their food businesses, through their recipes, through their experiences working and living in Italy.
So it came as a natural, when you were doing the art tours, you were living here at the time already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been doing archaeological and art history tours for a few years before it even occurred to me that you could do anything in the food professional world. I had done a sommelier certification just as a way to improve my Italian. I figured, like, what's the worst that can happen? I'm like, I throw away $1,200, space out over a year. Like, it was a lot of money at the time, but I'm like, it's cheaper than language school, and maybe I can do something in like NO tourism. And so I started doing the like these wine tastings. I really enjoyed that, but food tours didn't exist in 2003 or 2006. There was one woman called Marie Fant, shout out to the god. She was doing like a little market walk before cooking classes at her house, but there was literally no one offering food tours. So with that master's degree and that experience dissecting Italian gastronomic culture for people kind of casually, I decided to offer, tours, and it kind of took off from there. But I was already here. I had a deep comfort with curating a city experience, with deciphering different cultural phenomena for people so that they could then apply all those lessons to whatever experience they were going to have after we left.
That's amazing. And how did you, at some point you had to know how to curate the tours. How did you start from sort of scratch? Because you get here and you're thinking, okay, I want to do these art tours originally, and then they morphed into food tours. But how did you even get started? I mean, did people know about you? How did they find out about you?
Well, I was initially working for a company called Context Travel, and I did not know how to give a tour. I didn't know how to do anything. I was like 22. I sucked at everything. And so I would do Vatican tours that were supposed to be like a tight 2.5 hours, and mine would last like 5 hours. So I learned by doing it wrong how to create an experience that is what people paid for and what they expect. Not having to cover every single thing, because that is like physically and intellectually impossible, and having them not notice any of the like difficulties of being a living human inside the Vatican museums, which is one of the worst run places in the world. So it was a lot of trial and error, people like giving me feedback, some positive, some negative, but I knew that there were certain, like, you can learn the stuff, you can study the things, but it's also about like helping people navigate just like the very often challenging experience of being a person in Rome.
And I think, off of that point, we can learn anything we want to learn if we are open to it. And right now, at this pivotal time in my life, I followed a calling to contact you. I mean, this is a great example where I was booking my trip and your name landed in my inbox, and I said, that's really odd, because Katie Parla, literally watching her show, inspired me to book this trip to go to Italy to visit my family. And I thought, okay, a shot in the dark. I don't know. She doesn't know me. I'm literally going to reach out to her and say, what a powerful conversation we can have coming off of, this trip of me immersing myself in my family's food culture. You're connected with the food culture here in Italy. What an amazing conversation that you inspired this for me. But because I was open to receiving that and saying, this person has inspired me, what can I learn from that, and how can I change my life to follow what lights me up, and what about what that person is doing inspires me to go out there and go after something. You talked about another thing, imposter syndrome. Sitting here with you is imposter syndrome for me.
I refuse to accept
that.
No. Be nice to yourself. Everyone is listening. Imposter syndrome is a lie. Trust yourself and your talents.
And it's going back to the tours. It's like at a certain point you just had to start, and you had to start at the 5-hour mark, and then they morphed into 2 hours, and you were open to receiving the feedback on it.
Yeah. I mean, also a powerful tool is I had to support myself, so I had to freaking figure it out fast.
Right.
So, I mean, my advice to anyone who wants to move to Italy, do become independently wealthy, or be prepared to like really hustle. It's not impossible, but I'm curious, are you like thinking of moving to Italy now? Did you like look at the real estate listings in your family's hometown?
I did ask how much of it was.
What's a 2-bedroom?
So this is so interesting. So I asked, there are so many, so this is a very small town. I don't know if you've been there. But
I've never been to that village, but I know the Alto Casertano very well.
Okay. There's quite a few very charming towns around there, sort of castle-like little towns.
Oh, yeah.
what was so charming about this little town is that everyone, so I went there once with my grandfather. He treated the whole family back in the late 90s. I was in high school at the time. So all I remember just a few things. And I wasn't as interested then, right? So I remember being there and I remember thinking, okay, this is, a small city. My grandfather was like, okay, we moved to the US and I naturalized. And so I looked into potentially becoming a citizen because I'm 100% Italian. Both of my parents are Italian. My grandparents all naturalized.
Right. So they essentially gave up their Italian citizenship, not passing it on to their children.
Right. But what is so attractive about this town was that it's such a simple life. You have the panetteria next door. You have the mercado down the street with all your essentials like your flour, your yeast, your eggs, your pasta. You have the local cheeses. You have your local butcher. Everyone is able to live in this town and sustain a life. It may be a simple life. They can also work as a doctor, as a lawyer. You're seeing it sort of gentrify a little bit, where you see a few houses being, renovated. But I also asked, well, how much is a villa there? My cousin told me how much she pays in rent. She owns a house and she also pays rent. What she pays is insane for her little apartment compared to what I pay in the US. And then I thought to myself, the US is such a complex country. It's so expensive, and you're talking about anywhere we live. If I want to move to Italy, someone wants to move to the US, we all have to hustle because nothing's handed to us. But if I compare Italy and how it takes care of its citizens, there are some people in this town that don't work, or maybe they retire early. Mm-hmm. They're living a simple life and they're able to live their life. And also there's a lot of people that grew up, their families are there, they may no longer live there, but they have the property still there. Sure. And it might be abandoned. So what is it, I know you live in Rome now, what is it about Rome specifically that first attracted you versus all other places in Italy? And do you feel like it's still a simple life here in Rome?
There's nothing simple about Roman life. It's a complicated city, and that, like, the grittiness, the trash problems, all that stuff that is kind of gross to some people, that's the stuff that I find so interesting. I wouldn't say I like it because it really creates a lot of difficult situations for people, but I like a gritty kind of broken place. And Rome is that, plus a lot of beauty that shields it, I think, from casual visitors. But I like the complexity of it. The second I landed here, I went on a bus tour with my Latin class. We did a ton of cities, almost 10. But Rome was instant attraction, and I just felt like I had to live here forever. Totally irrational, but I guess maybe not, because it did happen. But at least in 1996, didn't appear rational to many of the people in my life, that choice. But I think, I don't know, I make the analogy I'm a Philly person, not a New York person, if you can catch my drift. I need something that's a little bit on the rougher side. I need sports fanatics, and I need a lot of street food. That's what really gets me excited. And so it was never a question about going somewhere else. Although Palermo and Naples are amazing too. It's just, I don't think I could make a living there the way that I do here.
And that's how I felt about moving to LA from New York. I felt the same way. It was irrational to my family too, leaving a big Italian family, but it was something was calling me to do it, and it changed my life. It changed your life moving here. Yeah. And
LA's the best.
Yeah. And going back to, at 5 years old, you talk about having this feeling that you knew you were going to move to Italy one day. So how did you go from growing, and you talked a little bit about it, but how did you go from growing up in New Jersey to making that dream a reality? And sort of, you talked about coming here and starting the tours. Mm-hmm. But going back to anyone that wants to move to Italy, and you ask me if I'm thinking of moving to Italy, sort of how does someone just go about sort of the gritty like, I'm gonna one day pick up, I'm gonna move. How do you find an apartment? How do you find your neighborhood? Did you have a part-time job while you were starting the tours? How did you get your name out there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I decided I was going to move to Italy when I was a kid and opened a bank account and started working and saving money as soon as I legally could. And then after that trip, my sophomore year in high school, I signed up for Italian classes at the community college, and during the summers in high school, I went to Rutgers University and took art history classes. Like, the only way I know how to do things is to come at it from like an academic, studious standpoint, because I don't know how anything else works. Like, I understand the structure of an academic setting. So, you know, I knew that I had to fund everything myself, and so all through college I continued to work and save money, and I moved 6 months after graduation when I knew that I thought I had enough to live for a year without working. But I also didn't know anything, so I definitely didn't have enough money. But the way that I found a place to live, like, I was just really desperate for a job. I took one at a boarding school. I lived in boarding. It sucked. It was not that cool to keep, like, boarding students alive on the weekends. And yeah, like, I didn't last at the school very long. Like, the whole way I found the job in the first place is the person who had my job before me quit because it was such a shitty job. And so after the semester was done, I was like, arrivederci. And then I really asked everybody I knew, like, do you know anyone who needs a roommate? They have to be Italian. I did not want to live with anyone who spoke English, because I met enough people here who had they must have tried really hard not to learn any Italian in the years they had been in Rome. And I was like, I can't be around that energy. That's deranged to me. And so I met some Abruzzese girls. I lived with them for years and just spoke Italian every second that I could. I knew that I was not good at it at first, but I was like, it's now or never. Like, my brain at 22 was not going to get any more, like, malleable. So it was, like, my chance. And then how did I get my name out there? Well, I spent my last, like, 250 euros on an ad in my university alumni magazine. And this was, like, a real Hail Mary situation because I wasn't going to be able to afford to stick around. So, just, like, shockingly, a librarian on sabbatical from my university hired me for 2 straight weeks. Like, 2 tours a day for 14 days in a row, which was enough to cover my expenses, like, for a year. For that year. I think I did the tours in, like, October. So it was like, it would get me through the end of the year and I was going to be good. And then I started getting more and more clients from that. And so I was able to, like, pair the company context income that I was working for and my own personal tours. And then I just started writing. Like, this was back in the day when, like, Apple had, like, a blog platform. And I wrote, like, a dumb blog that was about everything. So it had, like, no readers at all. But I was, like, enjoying kind of figuring out my voice and writing about stuff that I thought was weird and interesting. Like, I was doing a lot of underground archaeological tours. I thought that was really funny and strange and not something you found in most guidebooks. I was writing, scathing takedowns of restaurants that I thought were overrated and just kind of, like, chipping away at a writing identity. And it happened to coincide with the moment when so many publications were cutting their staff and looking for local stringers. So because I had this, like, kind of weird web presence and had credentials, like degree in art history, master's in food history, SOM certification, like, I tricked people into hiring me even though I couldn't craft a viable pitch. But they could assign me something and I could research and write it, so it was just a lot of, like, finding the outlets for, like, sharing what I knew, and then thankfully some people picking up on it.
And you also, I feel like, followed what inspired you and what invigorated you and what gave you joy.
Yeah.
And then you found your way.
Yeah, I knew really early on, even though I didn't know what I was doing, truly, that if I was just writing listicles about, like, the best pizza. Trust me, I do write those articles. It is soul crushing. But I was gonna be doing a disservice to like the interesting food people. It was gonna take my energy away from covering an interesting like pasta maker or cheese maker or baker, and so I knew I didn't want to like study like keywords and analytics and then craft my content based on what was like click worthy. I knew that would not be a cool place to live intellectually. So I was like, let me try just like following what I think is an interesting story and seeing where that goes. I don't have 1 million followers. I never will. And I know that especially like as I was maturing as a writer, I definitely didn't have like a lot of people who liked the things that I wrote. But I was like, you know what? I don't work for you. Like, I don't work for that chef. I don't work for this restaurant. I don't work for that hotel. I write this for readers and for documenting something that I think is valuable and interesting.
You're doing it for yourself. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm doing it for myself because I never have time to think about what that means because I'm too busy, but I'm doing, there's definitely a compulsion involved in like, you know, in finding an angle that is often overlooked and doing that. Because if I was doing it for myself, like granted I do have a show called Katie Parla's Realm. I didn't name it. I think it's a cool show, but I felt very uncomfortable having my name on something like that. So it's more like, what is my value? Like what service can I do? It's not necessarily about self-aggrandizing or I wonder if it's even like following joy rather than like following what I think is my purpose.
Right.
I think about that a lot.
Right. I mean, it's hard to find our purpose or know that we're on our purpose, but also I think part of our purpose helps service others.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's following what gives us joy, and I'm sort of on that path too, and trying to find my way out of corporate work into what brings me joy. And sort of this podcast morphed from my cookbook and self-publishing.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a couple of years, but thank you. It's a small little project, but we'll see what happens. And that's how I started the podcast. And, you know, it was this project of, it was completely self-made. It's self-published. So I started, and you asked me earlier before we started recording how I made it. You know, all the pictures were shot with an iPhone. It's more of a memoir. I wrote it myself. The copy editing I did with my aunt. My website I created myself on WordPress through Google. And I sold it on my own, got it printed on my own, shipped it over from overseas on my own. So it was a ton of work, and a lot of people, they loved it, and they asked, will you do another one? You know, I wasn't anyone. Like you say, like you created a name for yourself, but you weren't anyone. You started somewhere. I sold 500 copies. I didn't know.
That's like more than most.
I don't know anyone.
Large corporate publishers sell of cookbooks. So.
Right. And so, you know, you talked a little bit about your writing, but you also have published 4 cookbooks. Your most recent one, Food of the Italian Islands, was self-published, and you've talked a little bit about that. You also have a podcast, and you talked a little bit about that. You have an episode about it.
Yeah.
But you also have 3 other books and used publishing companies. So I know we both share the experience of self-publishing. And what lights you up about your cookbook journey so far, and what advice do you have for someone wanting to create one of their own?
So, Food of the Italian Islands makes me so happy. None of my other books make me happy at all. I know I sound like a spoiled asshole, but working with large corporate publishers, I realized after 5 minutes of looking at some spreadsheets and expenses, totally destroyed my finances. Like I was putting in a lot of money to make and promote books. I was making money for publishers and I wasn't seeing a return. I was actually in the red. And that felt like wrong somehow. It should feel wrong to everybody, but it's kind of like the vibe. And there's a culture in which like we're told you should be so happy that like someone gave you a cookbook contract, and I don't think that is right for everyone. And I also didn't have the confidence to do anything on my own at first. So it took writing a lot of books, my own titles for other people, to see that like, no, actually, I know how to produce this. I know how to make this work. And I don't know the logistics part, but I think I can probably learn it. So yeah, it was just kind of like reflecting on what little creative control I had, like what little monetary benefit I had. And I know when we talk about books, we're supposed to say that it's not about the money. That is not the publishing industry. The publishing industry is absolutely about the money. And losing money to produce a commercial product is not acceptable, but it is kind of standard unless you're getting like boku bucks, and I'm talking advances that come into like the 150 and up, $150,000 and up range. Otherwise, all that money goes to producing the book, hiring a photographer, managing the testers, doing promotion, hiring a publicist, all those things.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and that's another thing, like, you know this from working on your book. When you write a cookbook manuscript, that's not even the hard part. The hard part is editing it 50 times. And it's very time consuming, and when all is said and done, you might have spent 1,000 hours producing it. So if you actually aren't compensated for that, that is not great. And so I knew that I was putting in so much effort, so much work, so much research. I was like putting everything into projects. I was like out of gas. I had nothing left, and I wanted to find like, you know, happiness and joy in the process. So I was like, maybe if I'm the boss, it'll be fun. Turns out that was true, and I could hire very cool people who I worked with on past titles, and I was able to self-fund the initial expenses with some of my tour income, and then cover all the production and shipping expenses and publicity expenses with my pre-sales. And now the book is profitable. I've sold hundreds of thousands of copies of cookbooks. Not of this book, because then I'd be really rich, and we'd be in a much nicer apartment. I've sold hundreds of thousands of other copies of cookbooks that I've written for myself and others, but have never seen a royalty. So it's cool that like I covered my costs, and now I actually am earning money, which is great because, you know, I'm now in second print, and I've got to pay the printer for that, and I've got to pay the logistics company and get the container unloaded and all those things. So it's cool to be in charge. It's cool to be able to like actually, I'm not freelancing for a company. I'm not like doing a project fee. I'm actually in charge, and I'm more invested in the cost, the money coming in and going out, which has made me more thoughtful when it comes to considering other projects, not just in the publishing space.
And the recipes in your books, did some of them come from inspiration of traveling through Italy in the particular regions, learning from people that you interview, and how does that work? Because a lot of my last week was spending time with the people in Castelmarone, which is a very small town, understanding sort of the food of a lot of the recipes are based on the foods that they grow themselves.
Right.
So a lot of root vegetables like pumpkin, zucchini, potato, eggplant, and then of course pairing it with bread and pasta.
Right.
And so, and then I filmed the videos. It was a big, part of my trip was just really immerse myself and understand what is it about this little town, how do they live, how is the food culture. If I decide to do another book with that, because it's not of course I'm going to remake it, I have to remeasure it and then maybe tweak it.
You're going to have to do a lot of work to adapt them. It might not be your recipe, but you're putting all of that effort into managing all the things that you just mentioned.
I know.
But almost all my books have head notes that, all my Italy titles will reference the inspiration, whether it's the person or the menu, in the title or in the head note.
Okay.
And no one has a problem with that. If you just ask, can I print your recipe with credit?
Okay.
I'm going to adapt it so it actually makes sense and doesn't follow these like ludicrous made up gram amounts that you've written on a sheet of paper.
Gram or the cup out of your cupboard. Like,
which cup? Oh. So is it like Franca's cup or is it Francesca's cup? Like whose cup are we measuring with?
And my cousin's name is Franca.
Yeah. I knew it. I could sense it. Froggy's cup is a different size than everyone else's.
And they asked me what was the one phrase you learned here, and I said, "Ashpet."
Yeah.
Because I have to say ashpet. I need to measure that. How much did you just use?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I think I just used. The other thing I discovered in the store, the yeast.
Yeah, 7 grams per package.
No, it's paste. We don't have that in the
Oh, yeah,
States.
it's the fresh yeast, yeah.
The squares, the little cubes.
Yeah.
And I looked at it, I said, oh my gosh, this looks like a chewing gum.
Right.
Like a square of chewing gum.
There's a conversion that you do for like active dry yeast to the cake yeast.
I Googled it, I
with
didn't find
grams.
it. Someone
It's in
told me
my
it
book.
was.
It's
It
in my
is,
book.
okay. Okay, I'll look at it.
You just carry it around, it's only 2 pounds.
Great.
Yeah, just in case you need to do yeast conversions.
Okay, perfect. I need that.
Done.
I need that in my life. So yeah, I was like, okay, how do I import this yeast? Oh, actually, it seems like it works better than the dry yeast, but
It's something that's mostly available like in restaurant wholesale stores.
okay.
You should go to Surface in LA.
Okay, I
They
heard
have
of
it there.
Surface.
It's a great culinary destination.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Highly recommend.
Okay, I'll look it up. I haven't even heard of it. Is it a market or a...
It's like a kitchen store. They also have like a
Oh.
space where they do demonstrations.
Okay,
They sell food and ingredients.
okay.
They've got a few books.
Huh.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll check it out. So yeah, okay, well great. I'm excited to figure that out. So for anyone out there wanting to do their own cookbook, what advice do you have for them?
Okay, so one option is hire Parla Publishing, which is my publishing company.
Perfect.
There are a variety of services, consulting, just having like initial conversations about budget, goals, things like that. I really strongly believe in data, so like taking a look at the analytics from your various social platforms and things like that. If you don't want to hire Parla Publishing, which also does like printing services and all that stuff, then I would think about what your goals are. I would write down all the potential expenses and then multiply that by 2, just to get an idea of what your budget could be. I would think about just distribution. How are you going to sell this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have e-commerce already? Are you going to have enough volume where you can hire a third-party logistics company? If so, how much is that going to cost? I would think about how you're going to promote it. I would really think about everything from the job. And this is advice that I give to everybody when they tell me when they want to write a book. I say, don't do that. It's so much work. You're going to regret it in the moment, and you're gonna feel bad when it's going on. And I know this is not probably the narrative that you wanted to highlight on your podcast, but I mean, I think it's often friends who come to me, I'm like, I don't wish the process on my worst enemy. Like, it is tough. Literally no one has listened to this advice. So I know that there's something bigger than just that discomfort in the moment. But I would think about like, what do you want the book to look like? What features do you want it to have? Can you afford it? Because in order to like raise funds for a book, yeah, you could do a GoFundMe, you can do a variety of things, but maybe that's not going to cover it. Maybe it's actually going to cost $50K to put it together. Maybe it's going to cost $150K. You just have to think about what the monetary requirements are going to be, and it might not be worth it to do a printed cookbook. Maybe you start with something else, build your profile. But I would also look at some of the people who have done really well in the publishing industry, see how they manage their content creation around their book promotion and things like that. There are lots of ways, but I wouldn't just think about writing the book. I would also think about how is it going to get edited, who's going to photograph it, who's designing this thing, and then how do you distribute, promote, and market it. It's a whole gamut of things, as you know.
It is, and I didn't give thought to any of that besides, I started with the inspiration. I knew how it was going to look. I had Nathan Turner's I Love California cookbook, and I loved his book and how he shot it. Each chapter is a region of California.
So cool.
It was so cool, and it was appetizer to dessert, and I loved it, and I said that's how I want to shoot it. I want to do a spread to start each chapter of the whole table. So that's how I shot each chapter. I made the whole dinner, and it was during COVID, so I went to whoever's house would have me outside in LA, and I would say, let's shoot it, and we'd shoot it iPhone, and I just super scrappy, let's put it together. I didn't know how I thought I was going to go to friends and family. I think I printed initially 150 copies. I blew out.
Yeah.
And I said, oh my
That's
God, I have
amazing.
to print more. I printed more and I kept printing it. And I didn't have all of that figured out. So I don't want to have anyone discouraged. My why was I wanted to learn something else during COVID.
Yeah.
And that was my why. I didn't know that it was going to change my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that regardless of whether you have figured out all the stuff, it is a learning process. And so, you know, like the experience that I'm recounting and my trepidation in just encouraging anyone to go out and do it without thinking it through, just really does come from the fact that like I have to pay the rent for this apartment and I need to support some people in my life and like do things. So if that's not a consideration, like, you know, go ham, do it up. But if it's a job, think about it like a job. Think about it like something with a budget and a project manager, and how much support can you get from other people? Like finding people who are in the biz, either directly or tangentially, is great. Finding, you know, like cold calling people, just reaching out, asking for help and advice. Like if you write to 100 people and 2 get back to you, like, cool. It's great.
You got back to me. I mean, that's going back to the imposter syndrome. You get over that imposter syndrome of asking questions, being open to learn from other people, receiving feedback.
Yeah.
And it could apply to anything, not just cookbooks.
Yeah,
know?
for sure. A lot of successful people have a lot of help from a lot of people that you never hear about because they never get properly thanked. But it's not just someone being like a super good business person or genius. It's almost always a giant team effort and one that relies on like truly a village.
Totally, and everyone had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, we all have to remember that. You had to start somewhere moving to Italy.
Yeah.
So, and you built this life. That's amazing.
Yeah. There's one more thing that I would add. I would write a proposal for myself. Like a proposal is what you would write so that an agent can sell the book. But I would Google like cookbook proposal, and I would just follow that template. What is this book about? Why am I writing it? Why am I the person to write it? Sample chapters, an annotated table of contents, marketing and publicity plan. That's how cookbooks get sold. Why not apply something that is maybe a little like obnoxiously verbose because they end up being like 60 pages long? But why not follow the kind of template that publishing has used for a long time? Then you can diverge from the parts that don't work for you as a creative.
And like a business plan for
Yeah,
any business.
100%.
Any project you're going to start. Amazing. Katie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us where everyone can find you, follow you?
Yes, I'm at Katie Parla on all social, and I'm katieparla.com. That's where you'll find all the information on my books, tours. I've got lots of free recs about where to eat, drink, and shop for food in Rome, Naples, Palermo, Milan, Venice, a bunch of other places too.
And your publishing company as well, if anyone wants to reach out for that.
parlapublishing.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been amazing to meet you.
That's it. Ciao.
Ciao.